Okay, so we're being recorded for posterity's sake. Yesterday's Torah portion was actually a double parsha, right? It was not just Acharei, it was Kedoshim. The only time really you don't read them together is in a leap year, Jewish leap year, where we add a month. But barring that, we always read them together. By the way, it's interesting that the two parshas, Acharei, after death, Kedoshim, holy. And we learn from there that once somebody has passed, let it go. You don't have to bring them up in the muck. I'm not talking about Stalin or something like that. I'm talking about a regular person, right? Who's, oh, they weren't so good to me, or they weren't Kedoshim. Just let them be holy in the ground and just don't, it's over, right? We don't have to belabor it anymore, right? They passed, etc., etc. So the Torah begins. Acharei, Hashem spoke to Moshe, saying, after the death of the two sons of Aaron, when they drew close to Hashem. So the gist, and then Hashem gave them the instructions, and these are the instructions. You're only allowed to come into the holies of holies once a year. And you have to have the special garments. And he told them earlier on, you can't come when you're intoxicated. So what happened here was the two sons of Aaron, and there were many different commentaries and theories, and as it says, Elo ve'elo divrei Elokim chaim, both, all of them could be right. Both of them, it's not necessary, they're not mutually exclusive one to the other. But essentially is that we'll go from one Talmudic discussion, and then we'll go to the other discussion, which is more well-known. The Talmudic discussion is that that the two sons, Nadav and Avihu, the two sons who died, right? They were once walking in the street behind Moshe and Aaron. And Nadav turns to Avihu, and they said, we can't wait until Moshe and Aaron pass, and we're the leaders. We're the big kahunas. Right? He says when Moses and Aaron pass, we'll be able to be the holy ones, the ones that get close to God and be the leaders of the Jewish people, and that was obviously considered very distasteful to say something like that, and therefore the first opportunity Hashem was able to, when Hashem had cause, he killed them for that, because you don't say something like that about Moses and Aaron. That's not so well known. What is well known is they went, as the Torah says, they brought in an alien fire into the holies of holies. That they, if you look carefully at the Torah, each one came with a frying pan, which are steaming with spices. It's very similar, I believe, is when you go to a Chinese restaurant and you order, some dish, and it comes out like, and they put it down. So I believe that's what it looked like. It probably smelled like that. And there's a reason why Jews like Chinese food. They both came, and they both looked at each other and said, well, we can't both bring separate frying pans with spices. That's considered, two people coming in for no reason. We both bring, it's extra, it's redundant. So they joined together, and they both held the one frying pan, and they brought it in. And they were subsequently killed. It says in last week's parsha that a fire came out from heaven. It went in their nostrils, burnt their innards, and they died. And Vayidom Aaron was quiet. This is last week's parsha. Aaron did not complain, why me, why me, why me, which is superhuman. After you lose a child. I mean, I complain when I stub my toe, right? He lost 2 of his 4 kids, and Vayidam Aaron, and God said, and then God spoke to Aaron and told him about intoxication, etc. Now, Moses told Aaron, "Bikrovaya Kadesh, with those that are near to me, I've become holy." Moses told Aaron that It was incredible what they did. They had a desire to get as close to God as they could. And they're holy. And they'll always be recognized as holy. However, they made a miscalculation. And the miscalculation is a teaching for us forever. The miscalculation is that they wanted to get close to God, as close as they could, at the expense of their body. That's called, in Kabbalistic terms, that's called ratzoi. They were running to God. But the problem is that God doesn't want us to expire until He's ready. So what we need, in addition to ratzoi, we need shuv. We need to retreat, run and retreat. We have to get close to God. We have to daven with fervor. We have to pray, etc. And then shuv, live another day. Sounds like a James Bond movie, right? Learn to live another day. And here they weren't interested in living another day. They just wanted to get close. And that is actually considered a wrong approach. That to become an Essene, to become separate, just I'm going to study all day, and my family is going to be supported by charity, right? Is a wrong approach. You have to be a productive member of society. I'm going to work all day, and I don't know how old they were, Lenny. I don't know, it's a good question. Maybe it's written somewhere, I just don't remember. I'm going to work all day, and I have no time for God, prayer, and study. That's also not right, because that's too much shuv. That's too much retreat. Saying I'm going to study all day and rely on others to support me, that's too much ratzoi. You gotta live in the world, because that's why you're here. Your soul is in this physical world to produce spiritually, to produce physically, to grow emotionally, and mentally, etc. If you don't live your other half, because you're both physical and spiritual. If you just lead your spiritual life only, you're wrong. If you just lead your physical life only, you're wrong. These kids, I call them kids, these brothers, they just wanted to live. They just wanted to live one life. They wanted to live the spiritual life. And they didn't care the consequences, because they felt their body was inhibiting. Right? Which is what, by the way, we know about the Dead Sea Scrolls. So the Dead Sea Scrolls were right. The Dead Sea Scrolls essentially was the Essene congregation. What was the Essene congregation? There were different kind of sects. So we had the Pharisees, who were the more religious, the Sadducees, who only believed in Torah law, not rabbinic law. Then you had the Essenes, and you had others. You had the Acharei. The Essenes believed that we're a cult. We're a religious, spiritual cult, and we don't want to live in Jerusalem. We want to be segregated, separated, and they lived in a mountain, right? And that was considered wrong. Right? They completely separated and sundered themselves from the community. Rabbi Hillel says, don't separate yourself from the community. They said, nah, we can't be bothered. Then we're gonna have to deal with taxes. We're gonna have to deal with cleaning the streets, and we're gonna have to deal with, building gutters, because everybody was obligated to chip in. No, we're gonna live in a mountain. The Rebbe says that the fact that Hashem told Aaron right away they shouldn't be intoxicated is because they were intoxicated. They wear special clothes because they didn't care about clothing. They were so removed from clothing. We just want to get close to God. Clothing is external. So they didn't wear the special clothes. Hashem told Aaron, don't let your hair grow long, because they did. Because cutting your hair takes time. You got to go to the barber. And at that time, when they're cutting your hair, by the way, this is one of the times after the barber, you have to wash your hands. So when your hair is getting cut, you actually can't study. There's something happens when they cut your hair, you have to wash your hands. It's one of the, after the bathroom, when you give blood, when you cut your hair, when you touch a part of your body that's normally covered. These are the times you have to, when you wake up in the morning. So they said, nah, we'll cut our hair. Who cares about our hair? That's external. So they look like, what's the name? Stephen Bowie. They just had their hair long, right? And Hashem said, no, they're missing the point. They're missing the point. Cut your hair. You don't want to cut your hair. Take care of yourself. Wear clothes. When you go, wear proper clothes. And when you go into the holies, wear different clothes, right? And Aaron, think about Aaron. When he walked in the street on the way to the service in the temple, look at what he was decked out in. And the command was from God. So we can't ignore that we need nice clothing. In the Talmud, it says something interesting. It says that if a person, a Talmud Chacham, it says, a sage, somebody who should know better, has dirty clothes, they are worthy of capital punishment, right? Because how dare you? These clothes, first of all, someone will say dirty Jew, and that completely defies creation. When they say holy Jew, godly Jew, that's the epitome of creation. When they say dirty Jew, oh my goodness, that draws down God in the mud. But that's first and foremost. Secondly, what are clothing? Clothing covers the body. What is the body? The body houses the ark. If you're wearing dirty clothing, it's a sign that you don't care about your body that houses your ark. Do you know the ark that we have here, when it's run its course, and I don't know, 50 years from now, right? Somebody says, we want to replace the ark. We want to replace it with, so then they rip out the ark and they replace it with a nicer one, whatever. That ark that housed the Torah cannot be thrown in the garbage. You either have to give it to another shul, right? Or you have to bury it or cover it and put it outside. But it cannot be used for a dog kennel. It can't be used for firewood. It can't. It's holy. So if that's wood, can you imagine our body? And that's why when a person passes, right, the body is treated with such respect and reverence. We don't wait weeks until we bury, because that's not respectful to the body. The body, putrid, it's not respectful. So we bury as quickly as we can, etc. So yeah, we do have to wear the proper thing. Then the Torah goes into the Yom Kippur service. That Aaron, this is what you have to do, and God was very particular about which clothing you went to in the holies, right? So on a regular day, he wore his 8 garments, which is gold, and rubies and diamonds and etc. But on Yom Kippur, when he went to the holies of holies, he wore only white, right? And why? Because 2 reasons. One is you don't wear gold in the holies of holies. It reminds God of the golden calf. Secondly is the bottom line is clothes are external. Clothes are external. So even though they're important, but however, when push comes to shove, right? If you have to choose between buying nicer clothing or sending your kid to Hebrew school, Jewish school, nicer clothing, or a woman going to mikveh, it's no contest. You got to do what you got to do, and that doesn't include nicer clothing, right? So when they went into the holies of holies, he wore only white. He wore 4 garments: a linen hat, a linen shirt, a linen pants, and a linen belt, and that's exactly what we're buried in. We're buried in those 4 garments. In addition, they then wrap it in a linen sheet. And some places, not in Jerusalem, but some places is where they bury you in a talit, if you're a man. In Jerusalem, they cover you in a talit, but once they put you in the earth, they take off the talit. I think it's one of the only places where they don't keep the talit. So essentially, when you pass, you're buried in linen garments, and there's 2 kinds of linen garments: hand sewn, non-hand sewn, and many people are particular to get hand sewn. I'm sure Joan Rivers got the hand sewn ones, right? And it's so hand sewn. So it wasn't made. There was no machine. It reminds me of his name was Shlomo the Yellow. Shlomo the Yellow, because he had a yellow beard. It was like bright yellow, his beard, golden yellow. And he used to walk. Joel knows the story. He used to walk to the high holidays. He wanted to be near his Rebbe, and he lived, I don't know, 40 kilometers away. So he used to walk it, and he used to sing a song. He put a a stick with food, that was his song. It's called Shlomo the Geller song. And people driving with a horse and buggy who used to go to the Rebbe, they said, Shlomo, get in. He goes, I'm going to share my reward with a horse? No thanks. So he'd rather walk those few days to get to the Rebbe than share his reward with a horse. So people get hand sewn shrouds, tachrichim, because they don't want to share their reward with a sewing machine, right? So it's supposed to be a big deal. So Hashem says, okay, let's talk about the service in Yom Kippur. Service in Yom Kippur is first and foremost is that you have to prepare a bull, and this bull is going to be offered, and that's to atone for the golden calf. Secondly, is we have to prepare 2 goats, and they have to be done via lottery. And you have 2 goats, each goat looked alike. Each goat weighed alike. So they had like brown colored goats or black colored goats. I don't know what goat colored goats are. And they looked alike. And then they stood in front of Aaron. And Aaron, there was a box. Aaron took a piece of paper and it says, La Hashem. He put it on one of the goats. The next one says, La Zazel. He put it on one of the goats. Hashem, that goat was slaughtered on Yom Kippur to atone for the brothers kidnapping Joseph. And Azazel, the other goat, went into the uncivilized territory, and it's different discussion. The Gemara said it actually died in the desert, and it was not slaughtered in front of God. It went to Azazel. It went to Azazel, which means basically
like a craggy cliff.
A craggy cliff, yeah. And it was sent with a person who navigates and knows how to go. The Talmud says that the goat that had Azazel had a red string tied to it, and the end of it was in the Bet HaMikdash, in the Holy Temple. And when the goat died, the red string turned white. That's what it says in the Talmud. Anyway, so that goat went into the Azazel. It went into out of civilization, while this went to God. And so the question is, why? Why do the goats? Why do they have to search for 2 goats to look alike? Who cares? They're goats, right? They're goats. So a nice thought. I think this is from the Bedichov actually, but I may be wrong. He says that 1 goat was for Hashem, and 1 goat was for not Hashem. He says it's to teach us that 1 goat is for spiritual matters and the other goat is for physical matters. We have to dedicate both to God, and it has to be equal. And this is what it says. This is what the commentary says. It says God doesn't mind if you spend money on yourself. A nice house, a nice vacation, a nice car, a nice carpet, a nice furniture, doesn't mind at all. In fact, yeah, live well, live broad, live great, right? But on condition is that the other goat gets the same treatment. Is that the other goat, which is God's goat, right? That should also be done nicely. Nice mezuzahs, nice books, nice schools, nice shuls. Dedicate money to a Torah, a nice Torah, right? Don't say, no, I'm sorry, I can't give charity because I'm saving up because I'm going to Sedona, right? That smacks as your priorities are wrong. So God doesn't mind you go to Sedona, but you got to be fair. So your pockets have to be equitable. Right? And that's the lesson of the two goats, that you give to God and give to yourself. Then that's fine.
So balance is a big theme.
Balance, right? And by the way, the Torah mandated balance is you don't have to give 50% to God and 50% to you. No, God says, I just want a portion, which is Misa, 10%. Or the Talmud says, give 20%. Or as the Alter Rebbe says, if you're spiritually not up to par, then just like you would give whatever you would give to save your life, give whatever you give. Don't think about a limited amount because, oh, I've given 10%, I've given 20%. You give whatever just to save your spiritual life. That's the Alter Rebbe's insight. But yeah, balance. So and so if a person says, okay, if I buy this Porsche, Macan, and because of that, right, I'm not going to be able to afford giving charity, then don't buy the Porsche, buy a BMW. Right? That's the idea. If you can hack it. If you can't, if it's gonna take away from your spiritual pursuits, then it's wrong. If it's not, then beautiful. Why not? The Talmud says actually that there's something that helps a person live better, broaden their mind, and that is a nicer house, a bigger house. Right? If you live in a one-bedroom apartment and you have 6 kids, you're not going to be able to think about God. You're going to be eng, you're going to be limited, you're going to be narrow, you're going to be, just shallow. However, if you live in a nicer place and you have, and there's parks and there's greenery, the Talmud says it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing. Is to so and that should be our aspiration. No one says you have to live in a palace, but it's okay to live in a palace if it doesn't take away from your godliness and your godly responsibilities, etc. The Torah says 3 times that the Kohen should ask forgiveness for himself. And it works like this. The first time it says he should ask forgiveness for himself, because before you ask forgiveness for someone else, before you even begin to be critical rather of someone else, you first got to look inside. Right? Before I tell somebody, you're so quick to this, that, and the other, you say, hold on a second. First, let me ask forgiveness for myself. And then you can hereby tell somebody. So the first time is yourself. The second time the Kohen says, V'chipa ba'ado, for himself, or va'ad beso, for beso, he has to, his household, is my household. How's my progeny? Right? While granted, you can't be responsible for your progeny, right? If your children decide, I believe, by the way, you only have to 17. That's my personal belief. After 17, you've lost influence. Unless you're extremely close, then you have. But to where a kid is going to go, what they're going to do at 17, it's kind of they're on their own path. Some people say 16. But once again, the closer you are, the more influence you have. But so ba'ad besa, then you think about, okay, what's my household like? And then uva'ad kol kahal Yisrael, and only then could you ask forgiveness for everybody else. First, check yourself out. Right? How am I doing spiritually? How's my family doing spiritually? How's the rest of the world doing spiritually? If you reverse that order, chances are your family's going to suffer. If you care more about what the Kahal Yisrael is doing before you care about what you're doing, it's the wrong approach. And sorry.
Just such really good advice. So many people need to hear that.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, and I probably should stop the recording for this one, but for the first 20 years of the Chai Center in Dixils, I was super focused to the point where I wasn't available for, as much as I should have been. Right? I learned the hard way that, it's you're no good to anybody if your cup is full. People will get nurtured from your overflow. If your cup is not full, you can't nurture anybody. So you really have to, you want to teach somebody something, just a very narrow example, you got to study yourself. Yeah, I learned that the hard way. So the Torah tells us that this Yom Kippur practice, the Kohen Gadol should be handed to his son. So it is a dynasty. It is a dynasty. However, if the child is not up to par, it does not have to be a dynasty. Right? So the greatest nachas is for Kohen Gadol is if his son, the high priest, if his son becomes the high priest. But it doesn't have to be that way. So dynasties are only as good as they are.
You only have a dynasty if you get married.
Right? You hear that, Matthew?
Yeah, but you only can get a dynasty if you get married. You have to get married.
Yeah. A Kohen, that's right.
child.
That's right. Thank you, Steve. A Kohen has to be married, and a Kohen has to have kids, because if he doesn't,
sons weren't married.
right, the two sons weren't married. That's another problem. They didn't want kids. So I'm going to bring souls down to the physical body. You have to be married. Why? Because then you're connected to earth. You're connected to earth. If you're married, it means you have sex, which is holy. If it's married, it means that you're humbled, right? Hey, Amy. If you're right, if you're married, it means you have to sometimes swallow.
Yeah, but you have experience also of raising a child.
Married, right? You can get to arrogance. Marriage is supposed to be a give and take, and that's what Hashem wants. Right, the helpmate. It's interesting when God first introduces Eve, Adam and Eve. So the first thing it says, Eseloi, and it's loy toiva hayos Adam levade. It's no good for man, Adam, to be alone. Eseloi, I will make for him Ezer connector, a helpmate for him. That the translation of Ezer is a helpmate. Connectai means opposing him. Right? So it keeps you in check. Right? It keeps you in check. That the spouse's job is that you're a co-captain of your ship, not a captain. Right? You're a co-captain. When Joe Lieberman, when he lost the election with Al Gore, so he writes in his book that he was very, very sullen. He was upset. He lost the election. He could have been vice president. So Hadassah Lieberman told him, Joe, in our house, you'll always be vice president. Talk about turning the knife when it's in, right? The Torah.
Good question about marriage. Isn't it also that you have responsibility for someone else? It forces responsibility. Absolutely. Yeah, right. A person who's not married is generally lives for themselves. When you're married, you have someone else to take care of, to cherish, to nurture, to provide for, etc., as it's written in the Ketubah. For the man specifically, but the Ketubah does talk about reciprocal relationship. Yeah, that's definitely what it's all about. This is what I find, without mentioning names. Somebody that lives alone too long only focuses on self. Right? If you live alone, then your concentric circle is yourself, and it's not anybody else, and therefore you become a miserable person who's only focused on themselves. Right? It doesn't, and they'll do something for someone else
if it makes them feel good, as opposed to a spouse that has been many times beaten down, right? Because the nature of Amy, the nature of Preston's laughing, by the way, the nature of what it is, they think about someone else. So good point, Alan. So then it goes into the sacrifices, etc. Then the Torah warns us not to eat blood. Now, generally speaking, we don't eat blood. But we're taught is back then they did. Back then, you slaughter an animal, you ate blood. In fact, and therefore, and even now, if you have, and apologize to any vegetarians, if you wish to stop this for 2 minutes and look away, that's fine. But if you do not salt the meat, you are eating blood. Right? It may not be a cuppa, but so therefore you have to soak and salt the blood. You have to. Amy changed the picture, so now it's you together. It's a couple. Right. So you have to. So the Torah tells us clearly you can't eat blood and in any way, shape, or form, and therefore you have to soak. Elsewhere it says you have to soak it and salt it to remove the blood, and only then can you eat it. Torah also tells us you can't eat nevela or treifa. Nevela is an animal that's not been slaughtered, but rather dies either on its own or with a non-kosher slaughter. Right? Treifa is an animal that would have died within a year, even though it was kosher, even though it was slaughtered kosher. That's treifa. And in the reason, one of the reasons why kosher meat is so expensive is because of this rule. They slaughter an animal, and then they see what's going on. If the animal is diseased or has signs of, and it's usually in the lung, then the animal is treif, and it cannot be. So then that animal, so even though a shochet slaughtered it, the animal has to go to the non-kosher section or the non-glut section if the animal has issues, but it's still not diseased, but it has issues. So that's how. So if the animal would have died in the year, then that's called treif. And that's because in addition to slaughter, you now have to have people inspect the animal. Then you have to soak and salt it. That leads to the price. That's because it's multi. There's multi. And then they have to do whatever they do to the animal.
And it's always a manual slaughter, right?
It's always a manual slaughter. It's always a manual slaughter. And in fact, another part of kosher is that we do not eat from the 11th rib and back. So till the 11th rib, we can. So you cannot get a good sirloin, kosher sirloin, not good sirloin, kosher sirloin in the United States. In Israel, there are some people who know the craft of how to make a sirloin kosher, but it's very labor intensive, and for just practically, we don't eat the back half of an animal. That also makes it more expensive because now you have to give up. You have to give up the back half. The Torah tells us that we're not allowed to go kechukas hagoy. We're not allowed to emulate Canaan, Mitzrayim, Egypt, right? So we're not allowed to do. And then the Torah tells us about sexual things, that we're not allowed to sleep with whoever we want. We're not allowed to, then the Torah goes into incest. So you can't sleep with your father's wife, even if it's not your mother. You can't sleep with your mother-in-law. Right? I'd rather have needles in my eyes. Right? You can't sleep with a sibling. You can't sleep with your daughter-in-law. You can't sleep with a fellow man. You can't sleep. Torah goes into sexual. He says, and the Torah tells us that was what Canaan and Egypt did. There was such debauchery, is that they and bestiality the Torah talks about. Right? There was Torah says, don't do like Chukas Hagoy. Don't do like they did. However, there's more to the story. According to the halach in the code of Jewish law, is that we must not buy something in the store, an article of clothing, or a haircut design, if it's in vogue right now. If it's a must-have, the mushroom cut, the must-have, we don't do it. If it's a must-have that you wear, a certain type of sneakers with a certain look, it's not for you. You can buy the brand, but maybe not that style. If it would, because that is just following pop culture, and we're not allowed to follow pop culture, right? So if it's something specific, now you're allowed to buy clothes, just take them off the rack, that's fine. If it happens to be that you bought what was in vogue, okay, I mean, you're out of it. But if you buy it specifically, that's where the problem is. If you buy it specifically because you want to follow culture, current culture, then the current dress, etc. That's why I use the mushroom cut as an example. You can't. That's because then you're buying in to the nonsense. You're buying in. You're too invested, and to the point where you cannot live unless you have a duck Jordans or whatever it's called, certain version 6 sneaker.
Does that apply to Bitcoin also?
No, I don't think it applies to Bitcoin. That's not it. Bitcoin is not culture. Bitcoin is right. First of all, it's also very private. It's very private, but privacy doesn't really have much to do with it, because if you buy something and only wear in your house, because it's, you can't do that either.
So
Can you buy my pillow?
Yeah, you should buy My Pillow.
Absolutely.
For a couple of reasons. I bought My Pillow because I didn't like My Pillow, and I bought My Pillow, and yeah, I mean,
He just came out with slippers.
slippers, yeah, but I didn't buy My Pillow. I bought My Pillow because I said, okay, I need a new pillow, and I got to get a good pillow. That was my, okay, so where'd you get a good pillow? And that's where marketing comes in, that this is a good pillow.
So like if you follow a certain musician that's very popular, the Springsteen or something, who's in vogue, right? Pop culture, but you like his music. It's not, you're not doing it because he's in vogue.
That's correct. That's correct.
Right.
So if you follow something because you like it, that's fine. But if it's because, oh, I have to, because this is,
keeping up with the,
yeah, like teenagers, they go to certain concerts, right, before COVID, and screaming girls, right? Yeah, that's not something we do. It doesn't mean you can't go to a concert.
you gotta do it for the right reason.
You do it, The Torah goes into the next pasha, Kedoshim. So it's a double pasha as we started. Kedoshim is 64 verses, and each verse is another halacha. Each verse is another. It's wild Kedoshim, right? The Torah says you should be holy. You shall be holy. Not you are holy. You shall be holy. It's a work in progress. And Maimonides says something interesting. Rambam says that at the end of days, when Mashiach comes, all Jews will be holy. We'll get to the point where we're all holy. And it's almost like a guarantee. The Arizal says, he says, whoever goes to my mikveh, I guarantee he will not pass without doing teshuvah. Arizal says. So even if you're not holy now, you should aspire to be holy. What is holiness? Holiness is that you recognize that you're not, that you don't want to be just a common person. You want to be connected to God. The first thing he tells you is that ish imay vaviv Torah, you gotta ish, by the way, which means an adult. Ish usually means an adult. Is you gotta fear, reverence, doesn't mean fear of punishment. You revere one's parents. An unbelievable thing we learned from here is that even if we not revere our parents because they give us money or because they gave us a good education, right? Because even when you're an adult and you're independent of them and you make way more money than they do and you support them, you still have to revere. It doesn't change anything. They brought you into this world, you got to revere them.
What's the definition of revere?
So it's not love. Nowhere does it say you should love. Revere means that you give them the respect they deserve. When many people, when their parents come in, they do this. They lift their tush from the seat. You don't sit in the seat that's designated for mom and dad. You don't sit in their chair without permission in the dining room, in the living room, in the den, in the TV room. You do not talk, interrupt them, you let them finish and you talk. Well, these are all things of reverence. Now, what about an abusive parent? Right? What about an abusive parent? So, first of all, keep the visits few and far between if they're abusive, and no, you do not have to subject yourself to abuse. Verbal, physical for sure. Physical abuse, you get arrested, but you do not have to subject yourself to it. You don't have to. But in that same verse, it says a mother and father you should revere, and then it says and keep the Shabbat, which the commentary says mother and father you should revere, but nonetheless keep the Shabbat. So if parents tell you, come on, what's this Shabbat business? What's this kosher business? What's this business? You have to say, I revere you, but you cannot come in between. I'm still going to keep Shabbat. I'm still going to keep Shabbat. Right? So any other time I'll listen to you. You want me to take out the garbage? You want me to go to 7-Eleven? You want me to do this? I'll do it. But I will not do it on Shabbat because it's given here. Here you have your platform, your geshpanka, your backbone to say that I cannot violate Torah. Having said that, Manis Freeman, Rabbi Manis Freeman once spoke, and he says, just because it says it here, it doesn't mean you have to rub it in their face. I keep Shabbat and you don't. I do this and you don't. No. They invite you for a meal, and you say, well, it's got to be kosher, right? And and make it easy. So, yeah, I'll bring this. You just provide the bread, and I'll, the peanut butter and jelly, and I'll bring not the lox. I'll bring something that they can't do, right? Mana says you don't have to rub it in their face, which is true. You're not allowed to have idols, etc. And then the Torah goes into agriculture that a person has to, you have to give the poor, right? So here it's agriculture specifically. There were different things they had to do. So they had to leave the corner of their fields. If they cut with the scythe, right? If they cut and they held on and cut, and there was only and when they cut there was 2 remaining, leave that for the poor. Right? If there was grapes that grew oddly, they didn't grow like a bunch, but they grew haphazardly, leave it for the poor. That you always have to try and make room for the poor in your mind and your right. It says you should live iver. I'm just going through a few of them. Before a blind man, you should not put a stumbling block. That means literally, right? It also means don't cause someone to trip over. Don't give them bad advice. Right. Don't give them bad advice. So, and you know who does this a lot? Attorneys, right? Attorneys, husband and wife, they're getting divorced, right? So you go to an attorney. An attorney says, hold on, right? This is going to be a total of $7,000 unless I can get my pay to be $20,000. And they proceed to give bad advice, right? Which is why mediation is so brilliant, is that, you got to have 2 willing people, of course. That's the trick with mediation. That I've helped couples mediate, and it's literally $5,000 you pay to the mediator and the filing fees, and you're done. Or you can go to the attorney and they can rip your heart out. But that's kind of giving bad advice. That's kind of the idea of putting a stumbling block in front. They trust you. They trust you. They come to you for your expertise. And what did you do? Right? You tripped them up. And likewise, on and on and on. A friend, you give them advice, but it's to the detriment, not to their better, and you know it. Right? But you like to see the drama unfold, or psychopath. I'm not sure why, but that is bad advice. The Torah tells us, you should surely rebuke amisecha, your friend. And you can't go around rebuking people, says the Alter Rebbe in Tanya. It's not your job to say, excuse me, sir, right? You did this wrong and that wrong. It's got to be amisecha. We learn a few things from here. It's got to be your friend. You can only rebuke a peer. You cannot rebuke somebody who's not, right? You can't just go around, rebuking. It's got to be a peer, someone who you have influence over. Just to go around rebuking is terrible. Right?
Shouldn't it also be done in private so you don't embarrass them?
That's the next thing. You got to make sure that they remain your friends. There's ways to do it. You got to be gentle, right? And by the way, this is a parenting, right? Parenting. It's a plug for my book, Lenny. So my book is coming out May 25th. Amazon, Barnes and Nobles. So a bunch of that is on parenting. On parenting, so I write there, and this is a truism. Your child comes home with 2 A's, a B, and a D. Right? So most parents will say, I'm very happy with the A's. What the heck is going on with the D? Right? That's you're gonna have to take that class again, and you have to that. That's not the correct way to do it. You have to get your point across. Right? No more, PlayStation for you. No. That's not the right thing to say. The right thing to say is, I'm so proud of you, of your A's and your B's. We're going to get you help for social studies. Right? That takes the negativity out of it. The crap.
Support.
Sorry?
Support.
Yeah.
Support.
We're going to help you with social studies. Right? Or if your child does something bad. If your child does something really bad, so you can yell and scream and shout, or you can say, it's not becoming of you. I thought you were better than this. It's such an incredible difference between the two types of rebuke. I mean, it's got to be gentle. You got to maintain the relationship after the rebuke. The Torah tells us about love your fellow man as yourself. We talked about this yesterday. The word kamocha, like yourself, has the same numerical value as Elokim, God. Right? Why do you have to love l'reacha kamocha? How could you love? How is it possible to love your friend kamocha? Because you're both children of God. Kamocha is like you. He's a soul in a physical body. You're a soul in a physical body. Your brethren, your family, right? Or kamocha is love your friend like yourself, just like you love yourself. You've been a skunk. You know that you have flaws and issues. You know that you have things to correct, but you still love yourself. All right. So the other person has issues. It doesn't. You don't have to belabor them, and you may have to clear the air in order to go on, but you don't have to. But in a positive way. The Torah talks about the mushroom haircut. Exactly the mushroom haircut. A Jew, according to biblical law, has to have sideburns. They don't have to be long, right? They have to touch the cheekbone right here, so they can end there. Alan, you're good. Preston, you're good, right? They have to touch the cheekbone, right? If you do that mushroom cut, that circle cut, like the Romans did, then that's actually, you're not allowed to. You have to leave some form of sideburn.
Is there a reason for that, or is that one of the?
It's a biblical command. No reason given, right? You know, it's a way of distinction, really, right? Because they're cutting like this. You leave a sideburn and you leave it. That's how you do it. The beard, it talks about that you shouldn't touch this. You shouldn't destroy your beard. You cannot. The way a Jew cuts their beard is either with a scissor or with an electric shaver. A razor, especially a razor that gets under the skin, is considered tashchis, destroying. Just cutting your hair where it doesn't go under the skin, like with an electric shaver, that's almost like just an electric scissor. And it's closer because it's a microblade. But that you're allowed to do, but you're not allowed to, so you can't use a razor. So, so that's just filling you in. The Torah talks about scales, having proper scales, and even though it says in other places, do not steal, so that should come under, you gotta have proper scales, otherwise you're stealing. The reason why the Torah itemizes scales is because that's business. Many people say, when they're dishonest, they go, look, it's just business. That is not acceptable. Just because it's business, you still have to be honest, incredibly honest to the T, right? You can't just say, oh, it's just business. You find many people who daven 3 times a day, who study every day, and they're not so honest in business. It's incongruous. Your weights and measures have to be perfect. I think it was Yisrael Salanter, the founder of the Mussar movement. He said that if a person, when it comes to their scales and measures, their business, they're not honest, what they're really saying is, God, I don't believe that you can provide for me. He says, and that's heretical. I don't believe. I don't think you. You know what? Thank you for the 75%. The other 25%, I think I'm gonna have to do on my own. He says that's why it mentions it separately, is because it shows that you're a non-believer.
Isn't the weight and scales similar to Lashon Hara? Isn't the weight and scales like Lashon Hara? It affects multiple people.
Yeah.
Like when you sell something and you misrepresent, let's say, the right product, it can make someone sick. Let's say it's medicine, or they're cheating in a car part, or they're doing something that can have an after effect by not having the proper weights and measures. So it goes beyond yourself. It hurts other people as well.
Yeah, I agree. For the sake of business, these companies, they dumped pollutants in the water, and that was to save money and bit. No, you gotta be, and you check yourself, you measure yourself. Then the Torah goes in once again, but in longer form, into sexual debauchery, right? And so it's interesting. There's a great question here. Why, right? Why does the Torah have to, aside from repeat, right? The Torah issues the punishments for it in here, but why does it have to repeat? And why does it say it before? Why does it say you don't have sex with a sibling? I mean, my goodness, does the Torah really have to say it? Right? Or don't have sex with your mother-in-law. Does the Torah really have to say it? Right? So the answer to that is, first of all, if somebody does, right, the Torah's got you covered. There's a law for this, but most people won't. So why does the Torah say it? Is because every day we do mitzvahs and we don't violate God's will. Even if it's far out thing, we don't murder somebody, right? That's a mitzvah. God is giving us chances to gain merits. So he puts it out there, even though he didn't have to for the most of us, right? But he puts it out there for us to gain merits. And to be able to clock mitzvahs. So that way, when it comes in towards the end, the end of days, we have a lot of mitzvahs, even if we don't know about it. There's a great story in Janus concentration camp. There's a fellow by the name of Schneeweiss. Schneeweiss was a capo, right? He was a Jewish person who was basically the liaison between the Nazis and the Jews. And he used to get up in the morning. He used to whip and he used to ridicule and he used to shout because the Germans made him do it, but nobody makes you do anything. He was a capo. And at one time it was Yom Kippur. And the Germans on Yom Kippur used to give more food than they did the rest of the year. So 364 days a year, the Germans used to give, watery soup and a potato. On Yom Kippur, they had chicken in the soup, and they had eggs. They had eggs, something like that. So the Germans came with this tray of protein and carb, and Schneeweiss says they're not going to eat it. It's Yom Kippur. So the Nazi says they'll eat it because I tell them to eat it. Eat. And Schneeweiss says, no. This is a guy who belittled religious Jews, who beat with his own hands people. He goes, no. And the Nazis took out a gun and said, Schneeweiss. And they killed him. One of the witnesses, his name was Rabbi Sapiro. I think his name is Moshe Sapiro, says, I never knew what it meant. Even full of mitzvahs. I didn't know what it meant. I looked at this guy, he's not full of mitzvahs. I said, you know what? He is. He gained his world to come in that one instant. Because that just one mitzvah he stood up for. And that is enough of a merit. So there's certain things that we don't even know that we're doing when we're keeping them in the Right, we do. Right. So somebody should mute their Zoom because it's not fair for the others.
You actually, suffered a small stroke from.
I think that I'm not sure it is, but I think it's.
Having another stroke is really loud.
Anyway, so the idea is that you get mitzvahs and things that you don't even know you have. God bless. Tomorrow we on Facebook Live 1 o'clock. We're going to continue the Holocaust series. Be well.
Really is dangerous.